Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good people. My name is Martin Imodagewa Moreidi, and today I'm coming to you to talk to you about a book that I read this week. I'm really happy about this book. I'm glad, I'm blessed to have come across it, to have even thought of getting this book. I picked it up on Tuesday, and oh yeah, the book is called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And this book talks about how success as we think of it is not as easy as we it's not as easy as we think of it. He talks about how people like Bill Gates, um, Steve Jobs, we had about stories about them, about how they were geniuses, about how they left college early and started these great companies. Well, in this book, in Outliers, the story of success, Malcolm Gladwell explains how this, but like this particular people like Bill Gates, um, there's this other gentleman, Bill Joy, who started Sun Microsystems. Um, all these great pioneers in the tech industry, all these pioneers of Silicon Valley, were actually born around 1955, like around the mid 1950s, and how at that particular time is the right age or the right time to have been born for someone, especially in the US, to become uh, knowledgeable when they became older. Like computers started become easier to access when these people were, like just around maybe 8, 10 years old. And some of them had really big advantages, like Bill Gates came from a really well-to-do family. So he was able to go to a school that I believe in 1968, they were able to get a computer. And back in the day, back in 1968, the school he went to was probably maybe a handful of schools, universities included in the US, that could afford and had a computer in the school. And Bill Gates was able to go over there, play with it. And when the school couldn't pay for the computer anymore, Bill Gates was able to go and get a job at a different company when he would like to program for their computers for something, and the school allowed him. And so by the time he gets to college, he has programmed so much, 10,000 hours worth of programming. That's how many hours Malcolm Gladwell says it takes to become an expert or proficient in whatever field you want to be good at or you practice. And so by the time Bill Gates gets to 10,000 hours in college, by the time he's going to college, there's people who are only starting, and he's already even has work experience. This book talks about how lawyers, like people talk about how modern lawyers, especially, are mostly of Jewish descent, Eastern European Jewish descent. And he talks about how it came to be, how they were doing litigation work that back in the day, because companies didn't do hostile takeover, this the kind of work that they ended up doing was thought of as beneath by the people who ran the law firms. So when in 1970s, sometime in the 1970s, laws change and companies start having hostile takeover, and these Jewish lawyers who are doing this job that was thought or looked down upon by other well-to-do lawyers suddenly become the most valuable lawyers, and they end up having the most expertise. And to become this successful Jewish lawyer, you had to be born around 1930, and you had to go, like it takes a bunch of circumstances. One of the circumstances that Actually, I'll tell you all the circumstances that Malcolm Gladwell talks about that it takes to succeed. Um, I'm sorry, I'll have to read them because I wrote them down. It takes when and where you were born. So like he goes through a list in this book of the most affluent, the richest, the wealthiest people, let's say, I think in the last 2,000, 3,000 years, includes a bunch of names in there from pharaohs to modern industrialists. And one thing you notice with pops off, like if you notice things, is most of those names especially are people from the US and from within the last 200 years. And he goes to talk about because they were born in the US in the industrial age, these people like Carnegie, Rockefeller, they came up at a time when they had when if you wanted to be an industrialist, that was a time to be born. That was around maybe 1830. So by the time the industrial revolution hit, you were at the prime age, maybe 30, 40 years old, you know. And the second thing, other than the second thing after the place you were born, when and where. So like these people, like the industrialists, they were born in the US and in the 1930s. He has a story about hockey players, Canadian hockey players. um, the Canadian hockey players, the best or majority of them, 90% of them come from the months or born in the months between January and March or April, because the season starts in January, around January 2nd, 3rd. So if you are born in January, then you have an early development period, let's say more than somebody who was born in December or November or June, when and where. Second thing, good people, is what your parents did for a living. Oh, that's another important factor. Um, he talks about how this, let's say, Jewish people, or even another good example he talks about is Chinese people or Southeast Asian people who are really thought to be hardworking and proficient in math. And he talks about how these people, their parents, their great grandparents, their great grandparents, they've been working hard working jobs in rice paddies. They work shifts, long days, they don't take vacations. And so the children seeing this work ethic from their parents, when they have better circumstances, it transfers to them too. So they study harder, they're more likely to take their time to try to solve more problems, to you know burn the midnight oil. So that is what your parents did for a living. That's the second circumstance or advantage that someone gets towards success. The third one is um the circumstances of your upbringing. Like did you come from an affluent family? Did you come from people who are marginalized? So if you came from a marginalized society or marginalized people, it might be harder for you to succeed. You know, it is not as hard. It is not as easy to. It was not easy for a Jewish lawyer to succeed before the 1970s, like in the 1950s, like these Jewish lawyers who ended up starting these big law firms in New York. Their fathers, some of them, happened to be lawyers, but because of the circumstances of the work they did, how they were looked upon, uh, racially, I don't know, those things can either hinder you, or sometimes they can end up making you succeed or propelling you towards success. And yeah, that I think also covers the fourth thing, which is the traditions and attitudes we inherit from our forebears or our ancestors. And that those include a work ethic, or maybe to some people they can be subservient to their culture. In their culture, it is uh, good to be subservient to somebody who's a superior to you. You know, in some cultures that like there's not that much distinction. You talk to your boss like he's your friend. So those attitudes tend to differ. So someone from one culture going to another culture, or communicating with someone from another culture, might not be as successful, because he might be using these attitudes and traditions that were handed down to him, that in their culture they're successful, and in this other culture they're not successful. You know. So I hope I did a good review of this book. I hope you like it. I hope you checked it out. And oh yeah, I was gonna say I almost finished this book in one night, good people. I got it on Tuesday, and I started reading it before I go to bed. Before I go to bed, I read like about a chapter. I read for about an hour, and I ended up noticing like I had gone 2 hours past my bedtime. And I actually thought I did an estimation, and I was like, if I go for another 4 hours of reading, probably three, maybe four, I could finish the book in one night. But I was like, no, live to fight another day. And I'm glad I did. I read it today, finished it. Today, Saturday, uh, November 23rd. Read, finished Outliers. I'll post another video book review next week. I hope you watch. I hope you tune in, like, share, subscribe, comment. If you have any advice, anything, any tips you want me to include in my video, any suggestions, any advice, mostly. I like advice. So I hope you enjoy. Adios.